Long before any of this happened, I used to think of the bakery as the safest place in my life. I started working there at 24, after moving from Indiana to start over in a town where no one knew my name or my history. The bakery sat on a quiet corner between a tire shop and an old laundromat whose neon open sign buzzed like a dying firefly. My shift ran from 4 p.m. to midnight, when the streets thinned out and only the regulars came through the door. The quiet customer started showing up about a month after I began working, always at 11:52 p.m. Not earlier, not later. He walked in like he was stepping into a cold room, slow, shoulders hunched, eyes tired enough to look bruised. I remember the first time he came in. He ordered a single blueberry muffin, handed me cash without making eye contact, and murmured, "Thank you." His voice was soft, almost hoarse, like someone who wasn't used to speaking. After that, he became routine. Every night, same time, same order, same stare that lingered just a little too long. He wasn't flirtatious or inappropriate, just watchful, like he was memorizing my movements. I told myself he was just lonely. Maybe a guy working a night shift somewhere, grabbing his last bit of sugar before clocking in. I learned not to overthink it. Sometimes I'd try to break the silence. "Long night ahead?" I'd ask. He'd blink slowly, like pulling himself out of a fog. Something like that. Other nights, he didn't speak at all, just slid his money forward and stared at my hands while I bagged the muffin. My coworker Jenna joked he was typecast as a drifter in every crime documentary ever. I laughed because that's what you do when something gives you a weird feeling. Laugh it off, bury it, pretend it's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. And if I'd trusted my instincts earlier, maybe the rest wouldn't have unfolded the way it did. It happened on a Thursday night, the kind of cold spring evening where the air feels damp enough to cling to your sleeves. Business had been slow, so I closed up a few minutes early. The quiet customer had come and gone at his usual time. He'd given me the same lingering stare, but that night something felt different, like his eyes held a question he didn't ask. I got in my old Honda, rubbed the fog off the windshield, and pulled out onto the main road. The streetlights flickered in that unreliable way they always did. About 2 minutes into my drive, I saw headlights pull out from the bakery lot behind me. A silver sedan. His. I recognized the dented front bumper from months of watching it idle outside the bakery window. At first, I brushed it off. There was only one route out of the neighborhood. Maybe he lived in the same direction. But every turn I made, he made. When I slowed, his headlights dimmed. When I sped up, he matched my pace. A chill ran down my spine. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I called Jenna. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Weird question. Do you think the muffin guy is off?" "You mean creep vibes guy?" "Yes." "Why?" "No reason," I lied, heart pounding. I made a sharp right onto my apartment street. The sedan slowed at the intersection but didn't turn. It parked under a street lamp, just barely in view. I waited in my car for nearly 5 minutes until it finally pulled away. By the time I got upstairs, every muscle in my body was tight. My apartment was quiet, the kind of stillness that should have been comforting. I double-checked the locks, closed the blinds, and told myself the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But long after I crawled into bed, my mind replayed the headlights following me, the way he matched every turn. And then, just when I finally started drifting off, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Soft footsteps outside my window. The sound was faint, like the soft drag of a shoe across carpet. I told myself it was a neighbor, maybe someone coming home late. But then I heard it again, this time inside my apartment. I bolted upright. My heart pounded so hard I could hear the pulse in my ears. For a moment I convinced myself I was dreaming. But then the sound came once more, a quiet shifting, like someone adjusting their weight. I grabbed my phone and crept into the hallway. When I reached the living room, I saw something that made my throat close. My balcony door, locked when I got home, was now open an inch. Barely noticeable, but open. Cold air drifted inside, carrying the smell of damp leaves. My hands trembled as I backed into my bedroom and quietly shut the door. I flicked the lock, then knelt to the floor. Through the narrow strip of space beneath the door, I could see the faint glow of the living room light. And then, slowly, 2 shoes appeared. Men's shoes. Mud on the soles. Facing my door, they paused, shifting slightly, like whoever wore them was deciding what to do next. I covered my mouth with both hands, forcing myself not to breathe too loudly. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "Yes, someone's in my apartment," I whispered. Please come quickly." The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. I crouched in silence, listening to the shoes. They didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there, inches from me. The dispatcher said officers were 2 minutes away. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Suddenly, swiftly, the shoes turned. I heard soft, hurried footsteps moving toward the balcony, the faint scrape of someone climbing over the railing. When the police arrived, they swept through the place with flashlights and guns drawn. They found muddy footprints on the balcony floor, leading straight into the woods behind my building. But nothing else. No forced entry. No broken lock. No sign of the man who'd stood outside my door. When I mentioned the quiet customer, one of the officers frowned but didn't say much. "Could be somebody passing through," he offered. But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe that. Neither did I. The next morning, the police knocked on my door again. 2 officers. Serious expressions. "Ma'am, we found something you should see." They led me a 1/4 mile down the road to where the woods opened into a small service path. There, partially hidden by underbrush, sat a silver sedan. The same dented bumper, the same peeling blue sticker on the rear window. His car. Cold dread seeped through me. The officers opened the driver's side door. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a black spiral notebook with frayed corners. No name on it, just sketches. Dozens of them. My breath caught in my throat. Sketch after sketch of me, sleeping, reading, standing at the bakery counter. Even one of me tying my shoe inside my apartment, an angle you could only see from my balcony. "How the hell did he?" I whispered. The officer gently closed the notebook. "We're trying to track him, but the car was wiped clean. No prints, no ID." I felt nauseous. That night, I slept at Jenna's place. Or tried to. Every small sound jolted me awake. A creak of plumbing, a car door closing outside. Even Jenna's dog walking across the hardwood floor made my chest tighten. On Sunday, the detective handling the case called. "We're doing everything we can," he said. "But whoever he is, he's careful, smart. You should consider staying with someone for a while." I almost laughed. "I can't live like this." "You're not living like this," he said. "You're surviving it." The notebook haunted me. The sketches felt invasive in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just that he'd watched me. It was that he'd taken pieces of my life and kept them like souvenirs. And somewhere out there, he was still watching. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later, switched jobs, switched routines, stopped closing up the bakery at midnight and took a morning shift at a cafe downtown where the foot traffic never stopped and customers' faces blurred together. For a while, I convinced myself the danger had passed, that he had left, that I was safe. But trauma doesn't follow the rules of distance. Some nights, I still wake up convinced I hear someone shifting their weight outside my door. Not loud enough to be certain, just soft enough to terrorize me. I'll lie there, holding my breath, staring at the faint line of light beneath the door until my eyes blur. I keep a bat beside my bed now. I check my locks 3 times before sleeping. Sometimes 4. I haven't seen him again. Not the man from the bakery. Not the silver sedan. But fear sits in my bones, the way cold settles into old houses, quiet but permanent. I never went back to the bakery. I never saw the employees again. But Jenna still texts me sometimes. "You doing okay?" she asks. I always write back, "Yeah, I'm all right." But the truth is murkier, because some nights, when the world is especially quiet, I swear I hear footsteps on the balcony outside my new place. Slow, deliberate steps. The creak of weight, shifting. And I always tell myself the same lie. It's just the wind. Just your mind replaying old nightmares. But deep down, a darker thought lingers. What if he never stopped watching? What if he's just waiting for the right night to step toward my door again? I guess the worst part isn't knowing if he's still out there. It's knowing he once stood close enough to touch me, and I never even heard him breathe. Trust your instincts. The body recognizes danger long before the mind accepts it. Ignoring small warnings can lead to bigger risks, and your safety is worth more than being polite, dismissing your fears, or hoping someone's intentions are harmless. Before I ever learned how dangerous quiet could be, I used to believe the desert was the safest place in the world. I grew up on the California side of the Mojave, in a town so small we didn't even have a stoplight, just a diner, a gas station, and a church that doubled as a community hall. Nothing ever happened there. The biggest drama was when someone's cattle wandered onto the highway, or when the wind kicked up enough sand to shut everything down. By the time I turned 25, my parents had moved north, and I stayed behind to work nights at a convenience store off Highway 14. The kind of place where truckers fueled up, lost couples stopped for directions, and teenagers pulled in for Red Bull at 2 a.m. The pay wasn't great, but I liked the solitude. Nights were predictable, routine, safe. From the store counter, you could see headlights approaching from 10, sometimes 15 miles away. On a slow night, those distant glows were the only signs of life. I used to lean on the counter, sip my coffee, and watch the horizon flicker like a heartbeat. Around midnight one Thursday, the desert was especially silent. No customers, no passing cars, nothing but the hum of the refrigerators and the drone of the AC that barely kept up with the heat even after sunset. That's when a dark sedan rolled in, black windows, no plates I could see. Instead of pulling into one of the parking spots near the doors, it crept to the farthest edge of the lot, where the floodlights were weakest. The engine stayed running. No one got out. No headlights. No movement. Just idling. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. About 40 minutes later, I checked again. Still there. I walked to the window, trying to make out shapes inside the car. Couldn't. It was like staring into ink. I should have called someone then. Anyone. But instead, I went back behind the counter and told myself desert people do weird things. I didn't know that was only the beginning. Around 1:20 a.m., when the stillness had grown so thick it felt like a weight, a second vehicle appeared, a dusty white SUV I didn't recognize from around town. It rolled in slow, deliberate, and instead of parking in front, it pulled behind the dumpster near the back corner of the lot. Like the first sedan, it stayed running, and like the first one, no one got out. The hairs on my arms rose. 2 cars, both occupied, or maybe not, both running, both tucked into the darkest parts of the lot. That wasn't normal. Not for the desert. Not anywhere. I moved closer to the window. The SUV's headlights flickered once, then again, then a third time. A slow 3-blink pattern. Intentional. Across the lot, the sedan responded. 3 blinks. I swallowed hard. I'd lived my whole life out here, and I'd never seen anything like that. People flashed lights to signal trouble, ask for help, warn of cops. But this felt coded. The desert can play tricks on your mind, but this wasn't a mirage. A few minutes later, A group of travelers pulled in, a family driving from Utah to LA, bleary-eyed but cheerful. A dad, a mom, 2 adult sons. They came inside for snacks and bathrooms. I tried to act normal, but I kept glancing at the windows. "What's up?" one of the sons asked when he noticed I kept looking out. "There are 2 cars out there that won't come in," I said quietly. "Been here over an hour." They stepped to the window. The dad frowned. "Those yours?" "Nope." The SUV's lights blinked again. 3 slow pulses. Then the sedan shifted positions, rolling 20 feet, stopping, then repeating. "Are they circling you?" the younger son asked. Before I could answer, both vehicles pulled forward in a synchronized creep, stopping at opposite corners of the lot like they were bracketing the store. The older son said, "We're not leaving you alone tonight." I didn't argue. Not for a second. The travelers stayed inside, wandering the aisles even though they weren't really shopping. Every few minutes, one of them would peek out the window. The mom stood near me at the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight. "What do you think they want?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but they didn't do any of this until you walked toward the door." Across the lot, the sedan's engine revved, a low, rolling growl. The SUV behind the dumpster slowly crept into full view. Their movements were coordinated, deliberate, as if someone were giving orders neither of us could hear. "Maybe they're meeting each other," I offered weakly. The younger son shook his head. "People meeting up don't hide behind dumpsters and blink Morse code." Both cars drifted in slow, overlapping circles around the lot, weaving in and out of each other's paths like a choreographed loop. They stayed just out of full light, hugging the edges of the darkness. One of the sons pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." "No service," he muttered after a moment. "You got Wi-Fi?" "Spotty," I said, "but try." He tried. Nothing. The mom's voice was trembling now. "Why are they circling like that?" "I don't know," I said, "but we're locking the doors." I flipped the deadbolt. One of the cars, a white SUV, stopped directly in front of the glass, headlights shining straight into the store. The light was so bright I had to shield my eyes. "Back away," the older son said, stepping in front of me. The SUV idled for a long moment, then backed up. The sedan did the same. Then both pulled into the far right corner of the lot and parked again, engine still running. The older son said, "We're staying until sunrise." And I believed him, because whatever those cars were doing, none of us wanted to see what would happen if I were alone. Sunrise in the desert is usually beautiful. Pink haze, orange glow, long shadows stretching across the sand. But that morning, when the horizon finally lightened, it felt like someone had lifted a weight off my chest. As soon as the sky brightened, both vehicles pulled out. Not fast, not like they were fleeing, more like they had finished their business and were slipping away into the barren miles beyond the storefront. The travelers waited until they were fully out of sight, then insisted on following me outside and checking the lot. Nothing but tire tracks. The sheriff showed up 15 minutes later, a stocky man named Harlan I'd known since childhood. "You said the cars were flashing signals?" he asked, notebook out. "Yes," I said. 3 blinks, back and forth, for hours. The travelers backed me up, each giving the same account. The circling, the synchronized movement, the engines running with no people inside. Harlan's expression darkened. "We've had reports of vehicles matching that description," he said slowly. "Mostly from drifters and truckers. People go missing along this stretch. We believe some groups coordinate pickups, drop-offs, exchanges." My stomach dropped. "Exchanges of what?" I asked. "Sometimes drugs," he said. "Sometimes people." I felt sick. "Why my store?" I whispered. "It's isolated," Harlan said. "Few cameras. You work alone. Perfect spot for scouting targets or meeting without suspicion. The travelers exchanged looks, suddenly pale. "You're saying they might have been waiting for her?" one of them asked. Harlan didn't answer. He didn't need to. After the report was filed, the family offered to follow me home, but I told them I'd be fine. It wasn't true, but I couldn't make strangers responsible for my fear. That night, when I pulled into the store for another shift, my hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice. Because of course, I was still the only employee working nights. The sheriff's warning echoed through my mind for weeks. I kept imagining those cars returning, creeping back into the lot, inching toward the glow of the store like sharks testing the tide. I started carrying pepper spray in my pocket and a tire iron behind the counter. I kept the door locked when no customers were around. I even taped cardboard over the front window because the feeling of being watched became unbearable. But nothing happened. Not for a while. Then one night around 3 a.m., when the desert was as silent as a graveyard, a single pair of headlights appeared on the horizon, far away, approaching slow. Too slow. My chest tightened. "It's nothing," I told myself. "Just another late-night traveler." But as the lights approached, the car drifted to the shoulder, stopping about 50 yards from the store. Engine running. Lights on. That same cold feeling washed over me. I crouched behind the counter, peeking through the narrow gap between the cardboard and the window frame. The car didn't move. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, a pair of brights flashed. 3 slow pulses. I locked the restroom door, slipped into the employee back room, and called the sheriff without hesitation. Harlan arrived within minutes, desert dust swirling behind his cruiser. As soon as his headlights hit the shoulder, the car sped off into the darkness. Gone. Harlan came inside, hands on his hips. "You're filing another incident report," he said, "and you're not working nights here anymore." "I can't quit," I whispered. "I need the job." He shook his head. "And I need you alive." That was 3 years ago. I moved, found a new job, new hours. But even now, when I see a lone pair of headlights on an empty road, I freeze. Because I know better than to assume it's nothing. Some things wait for you to be alone. Trust your instincts. Danger rarely arrives with a warning you can decode in the moment, but your intuition knows when something is wrong. Listen to the fear that whispers, not the logic that dismisses it. Your life is worth more than staying silent or staying in harm's way. I never imagined I'd spend my evenings cleaning a mansion bigger than my entire apartment complex, but life doesn't always give you elegant choices. When my mom got sick and the medical bills piled up, I took whatever work I could find. That's how I became a part-time maid for the Harlow family. 2 wealthy business people who were almost never home. They traveled constantly, leaving their lakeside house quiet, cold, and echoing with space nobody lived in. The Harlows were polite enough but distant. Everything between us was clipped and professional. "You'll mostly work nights," Mrs. Harlow told me during my first walkthrough. "We're rarely around. Just lock up when you leave." I nodded, pretending not to notice the security cameras scattered through the hallways like blinking metal eyes. For months, I cleaned the same silent rooms every week. The glassy foyer with its giant chandelier, the perfectly staged living room with throw pillows no one ever used, the guest rooms that smelled like lavender but never had visitors. I'd put on a podcast, dust until the batteries in my vacuum died, and leave. Nothing strange ever happened, until it did. On an early winter night, wind scraping across the lake, I was alone upstairs wiping down picture frames. The house felt unusually still, like it was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, a faint scraping beneath the floorboards. Soft at first, then deliberate. A dragging sound, too irregular to be the house settling. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, because that's apparently what people do right before they die in movies. No answer. I crouched down, pressed my ear to the hardwood, and listened. Another scrape. Then a pause. Like someone, or something, stopped when they realized I was listening. I stood up fast. The Harlows had an attic, yes, but the sound came from below. Under me. The house was supposed to be empty. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong, and part of me wished I'd walked out then. But curiosity, stupidity, or maybe desperation kept me searching. I retraced my steps down the hallway, checking rooms I'd already cleaned, listening for anything out of place. The scraping had stopped, which somehow made everything worse. Silence can be loud when you're waiting for something to happen. Then, while dusting along the baseboards of the master bedroom, I noticed something odd. The wardrobe against the far wall didn't sit flush with the trim. A thin sliver of shadow peeked behind it, as if the piece had been moved recently. The wardrobe was heavy, carved from dark wood, the kind rich people keep sweaters they never wear in. I grabbed the side and pushed. It slid easier than I expected. Behind it was a narrow door. I stared at it, my mouth going dry. I had worked in this house for months. I knew every drawer, closet, and cabinet, but I had never, not once, seen this door. It was painted the same cream color as the walls, blending in so well you'd never notice it unless you were looking. The doorknob was old brass, scratched and slightly dented. I tugged, locked. Something in my chest twisted. Why would the Harlows hide a door behind furniture? And why lock it in a house no one lived in? I hesitated. Maybe I should leave. Maybe I should call someone. But the memory of the scraping sound gnawed at me. What if someone had broken in? What if the house wasn't empty after all? I grabbed the key ring the Harlows left for me and tested them one by one. 3 keys in. Click. The lock gave. The smell that drifted out was stale and warm, like old fabric mixed with dampness. A narrow staircase descended into dimness, lit only by a weak bulb halfway down. "Anyone down there?" I called. No response. Just the faintest echo of something shifting in the dark, too soft to identify, but enough to raise the hairs on my arms. I took one careful step downward, then another. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. I was not alone in that house. The staircase opened into a cramped basement room, the kind that wasn't included in the glossy online photos of the Harlows' home. The walls were rough concrete, unfinished, sweating with moisture. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, flickering every few seconds like it was struggling to stay alive. In the corner sat a stained mattress. Thin, lumpy, the kind you'd find dumped behind a thrift store. Blankets were piled around it, some balled up, some flattened like someone had been lying on them recently. Empty food containers littered the floor, granola bar wrappers, half-eaten sandwiches, a water bottle with cloudy fingerprints. My stomach flipped. Someone had been living here, and not just occasionally. Often. A small crate against the wall held clothes, men's clothes, dirty ones. I backed up, shaking my head. What the hell? None of this made sense. The Harlows were wealthy, secure, careful. How would they not know someone was staying beneath their floorboards? Or, my throat tightened, did they know? A soft scuff echoed behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But then, from the stairwell above, came another sound. Footsteps, fast, heavy, coming down toward me. Adrenaline surged through me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the mattress. "Hey, I'm calling the police!" I yelled, though the tremor in my voice ruined any hope of sounding brave. The steps sped up. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. They were charging. I bolted for the stairs, mind screaming, "Move, move, move," but the footsteps were too close. I wouldn't make it past them. Without thinking, I slammed the basement door shut and threw my weight against it. The knob rattled. Something shoved hard from the other side. I screamed. Then, with every ounce of strength I had, I shoved the wardrobe back across the doorway, wedging it in place. The rattling stopped, but I didn't wait to see if it started again. I ran. I tore down the hallway, grabbed my bag, and sprinted down the stairs so fast I nearly slipped. Every shadow felt alive. Every creak felt like footsteps behind me. "Just get to the car," I kept whispering. "Just get out." My hands shook as I fumbled with the front door lock. When it finally clicked open, I bolted outside and didn't breathe until I was behind the wheel. I locked the doors, started the engine, then sped down the long driveway, gravel spitting under my tires. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't stop driving until I reached the police station 2 towns over. My chest heaved, my throat raw, and my hands wouldn't unclench from the steering wheel until an officer tapped on the glass and gently said, "Ma'am, can you step out?" Inside, I told them everything. The scraping, the hidden door, the mattress, the footsteps rushing toward me. The officers exchanged tight, serious looks. "We'll send units immediately," one said. Hours later, a detective called me. "We found signs someone was living there," he said. "Food waste, bedding, a heating plate, and pry marks near the basement window. Whoever it was probably entered through the crawl space under the deck." "Did you catch him?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No. House was empty when we arrived." "What about the Harlows? Did they know?" He hesitated. "They claim they didn't, and maybe they didn't. But whoever was living there, they'd been there for weeks, maybe months." I leaned back against the wall, heart pounding. Someone had been inches beneath me all those nights, watching, listening, waiting. The detective continued. "Whoever he is, he's gone. But keep your doors locked, just in case. Just in case." Those words kept me awake for weeks. The Harlows returned 2 days later. They called me once to apologize for the inconvenience, as if someone living under their house was a scheduling conflict. They insisted I continue working for them, said they'd update security, repair the basement, hire a contractor. I hung up before they finished. I never went back. For months, I couldn't sleep without checking my closet twice and my windows 3 times. Every faint noise made my heart slam against my ribs. I moved apartments, added extra locks, adopted a dog who barked at shadows before I even heard them. Therapy helped. Time helped. But fear never fully disappears. It just becomes quieter. One night, about 6 months after everything happened, I woke to a soft tapping sound outside my bedroom window. My dog stiffened beside me, growling low. I froze. The tapping came again, slow, deliberate. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Just branches moving in the wind. My heart wouldn't settle for hours. The police never found the man who lived under the Harlows' house. They said he probably moved on, maybe to another empty property, another hidden space, another place where no one would notice he existed at all. But sometimes, late at night, I think about how fast he ran up those stairs, how he knew I was there, how he reacted when he realized I had discovered his room. And I wonder whether he ever thinks about me, whether he ever meant to come up those stairs before that night, whether he still might. Pay attention to what feels wrong, even when it doesn't make sense. Danger doesn't always shout. It whispers, scratches, and hides behind doors we never noticed. Trust your instincts, and never ignore the small signs that tell you something isn't right. Your safety is worth listening to. I didn't grow up thinking late-night drives through the countryside would ever scare me. If anything, those roads used to feel like home. I was raised in a nowhere town in southern Missouri, the kind where the sky swallowed you whole and the nights were so quiet, you could hear your own heartbeat if you stepped outside after midnight. My mom liked to say the dark wasn't dangerous. that it only felt that way because people didn't know how to sit with silence. But somewhere between childhood and my early 20s, I learned silence can hide things. People. Intentions. Moments you don't see coming. I'd been working at Harlan's Grill for almost 2 years by then. A late shift line cook, earning enough to keep my bills paid and my beat-up Corolla running. The job wasn't glamorous, but the tips from serving helped, and I liked the stillness of leaving work after everyone else had gone home. That quiet rural highway between the restaurant and my apartment felt like my safe zone, a place where I could roll the windows down, smell the hayfields, and clear my head. I didn't have much of a social life. Most nights ended the same way, closing the kitchen, grabbing an iced tea for the road, and driving the 25 miles back to my place. My coworkers always teased me for taking the highway instead of the town route. "You're gonna get abducted by a raccoon militia," my friend Mark joked once as he clocked out. But I liked that road. It felt honest, empty, but honest. That last week in September, though, something in me felt restless. I couldn't explain it then, but looking back now, I think some part of me already knew something was coming, something that would change the way I see the dark forever. It was a Thursday night, almost 1 a.m. when my shift ended late. I scrubbed down the grill, tossed my apron in the laundry bin, and grabbed my keys, grateful the day was finally over. I remember the humidity clinging to me like a second shirt as I walked to the parking lot. The highway was nearly empty, just a semi far ahead, and the faint glow of farmhouses scattered miles apart. I rolled the windows down, letting warm air rush in. The moon hung low, bright enough to paint the field silver. 5 miles out, I approached the old concrete overpass. I'd driven under it hundreds of times, never thought much about it. Just a relic from the 70s, cracked and graffitied, sitting above a road hardly anyone used. But that night, something was different. I spotted movement on the bridge, a figure, tall, slender, standing on the railing like they were balancing on a beam. Moonlight outlined the shape, making it look almost ghostly. My first thought was simple. Hiker. Maybe someone camping in the woods nearby. Weird, sure, but not threatening. But as my headlights crept closer, the figure crouched, then dropped down behind the support pillars. Not jumped, not climbed. Dropped, like someone who'd been waiting. A cold wave rushed through my chest. "Probably just messing around," I muttered out loud, trying to steady myself. "Kids do dumb stuff." I eased off the gas but kept rolling. I didn't want to stop, not even for a second. The road curved slightly under the overpass, and for a brief moment, everything went pitch dark. Then my headlights swept out the other side, and a man stepped directly into the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt snapped against my chest. My car skidded sideways and stalled in a cloud of dust. He just stood there, smiling. The man approached slowly, like he didn't want to spook me, yet somehow he was the one radiating danger. Sweat stuck my hair to my forehead as I fumbled to lock my doors. My fingers shook so badly I almost missed the button. He tapped the window with a single knuckle. Not hard, not aggressive, almost polite. "Evening," he said through the glass, giving a slow smile that felt too practiced. "Didn't mean to scare you. I just need a ride back to camp." Camp? At 1 in the morning? Out here? "Sorry," I called out, trying to sound firm, trying not to let the quiver in my voice show. "I'm not giving rides tonight. You should call someone." His smile twitched. "Don't have anyone to call." He leaned down until his face filled the window, eyes pale, unfocused. "It's just down the road. Not far." I swallowed hard. "I really can't help you." That's when I saw movement behind him. A second silhouette was creeping down the grassy slope beside the overpass, staying low, using the weeds as cover. I don't know how long they'd been watching. The first man must have seen my eyes shift, because he turned slightly. "Oh," he said quietly, You saw him." My heart dropped into my stomach. The second figure straightened and began walking toward my passenger side, not running, approaching like they'd rehearsed this. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Nope, no way, not today." The first man tried the door handle. "Come on now," he said, voice turning sharp. "Just open up. It's real easy." I threw the car in reverse so fast the engine screamed. Gravel spit out from beneath my tires as I whipped backward, swinging the car toward the opposite lane. The first man lunged. The second one broke into a sprint. My tires caught traction, and I floored it. My headlights shook wildly over the pavement as I blasted backward down the highway, heart punching against my ribs. I didn't care that I was in the wrong lane. I just needed distance. The two men chased after me, their silhouettes flailing in the dust cloud. One of them yelled something I couldn't make out, something guttural and furious. But their voices disappeared as I spun the wheel and straightened the car, slamming the gas pedal to the floor. My Corolla whined, trembling like it might fall apart if I pushed it any harder. But it carried me forward, mile after mile, until the overpass vanished behind me, and the night swallowed everything else. I didn't cry. Not yet. My body was too busy surviving. 10 minutes later, I saw the bright neon sign of Miller's 24-hour diner glowing like a lifeboat. I pulled in so fast I nearly clipped the curb. Inside the diner, everything looked absurdly normal. 2 truckers drinking coffee, a waitress refilling salt shakers, a radio playing soft country music. I staggered inside, feeling like I'd left part of myself on that highway. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a messy bun, stared at me. "Honey, you look like you saw a ghost." "2," I breathed. "Maybe more." I took a booth and tried to steady my hands around a cup of coffee. The waitress kept glancing at me like she expected me to bolt. Eventually, my coworker Mark walked in for a late meal after his own shift. His face drained when he saw me. "Jenna, you okay?" I told him everything. The figures on the bridge, the man in the road, the second silhouette creeping behind him. Mark scrubbed his palms over his face. "Jesus. Jenna, there's been robberies out there. At that exact overpass. Guys waiting in the dark, jumping people who stop. I thought they only targeted broken down cars." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I called the county sheriff that night, filing a report even though I knew nothing would come of it. They asked the usual questions: height, clothing, tattoos, accents, but all I could say was that their faces blurred into moonlight and panic. The deputy promised to take a look, which I knew meant patrolling once, maybe twice, and then forgetting. Still, telling someone made me feel a little less helpless. Driving home from the diner was the hardest part. I refused to take the highway again, even though the alternate route took an extra 40 minutes. Every shadow on the roadside felt like a person. Every passing car felt like a threat. For weeks afterward, I kept locking my doors twice. I'd pause before getting into my car, scanning the edges of the lot for movement. My manager noticed my jumpiness and cut back my late shifts for a while. I didn't tell my mom right away. She would have insisted I move back home, away from everything. I didn't want to feel like a scared kid again. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I overheard 2 officers at the diner counter talking about another attempted robbery near the overpass. This time, the driver had stopped because someone was pretending to limp across the road. The officers said the group likely moved in packs. 3, maybe 4 men. My stomach twisted knowing I'd escaped something that was bigger than I realized. That night, sitting on my apartment balcony, I thought about how I'd once loved driving those quiet back roads. But the truth is, danger doesn't always roar. It often waits quietly, patiently, in the places you think you know best. And sometimes survival isn't about being brave. It's about listening when your instincts whisper run. Trust your instincts, even when your mind tries to rationalize them away. Fear isn't always an overreaction. Sometimes it's your only warning before danger steps out of the shadows. Stay aware, stay cautious, and never ignore the feeling that something isn't right. I never meant to work nights for a living. Growing up in a small Kansas town, I always thought I'd do something loud and exciting. Bartending, working concerts, anything with people and noise. But life doesn't care about the plans you make at 17. Rent came first. So did steady hours. That's how I ended up as the evening maid at the Laurel Crest Boutique Hotel, a place with soft jazz in the lobby and carpets thick enough to mute your own footsteps. Most people assume hotel work is chaotic and stressful, but the night shift isn't like that. It's slow, predictable, almost peaceful. Guests settle in early, and most of my time is spent folding laundry, wiping down minibar counters, and restocking linens. I used to like the quiet. It gave me room to think without anyone interrupting. My supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Terry, always said, "Night work is for folks who don't mind being ghosts." I laughed at that the first time she told me. Back then, I thought she meant unseen, not haunting empty floors like some restless spirit in a uniform. But over time, the stillness of the halls started to feel different. The hotel had a personality after midnight. Air vents sighing, old pipes groaning, the elevator dinging at odd hours even when no one was inside. None of it scared me, though. Routine makes anything normal, at least until that one Thursday night in October. I'd come in tired, behind on sleep, and ready for a quiet shift. The hotel was fully booked for a local conference, but everyone had checked in hours earlier. I figured I'd be done early, home by 2, maybe in bed by 3. I had no idea the calm I depended on was about to break in the most unsettling way possible. It was close to midnight when I made it up to the 3rd floor. The air smelled faintly of lavender, housekeeping's choice of air freshener, and the hallway lights buzzed softly overhead. I'd been emptying room trash bags, moving from door to door, humming to myself to fill the silence. That's when I saw him. A tall silhouette standing at the far end of the hallway, right where the carpet turned left toward the storage closet and the old vending machine nobody used anymore. At first, I thought it was a guest. Sometimes people wandered at weird hours, looking for ice or sneaking out for late snacks, but something felt off. He wasn't moving, just standing there like a statue. And I didn't recognize the broad shape of his shoulders or the jacket he wore. "Sir?" I called, trying to sound professional. "Do you need help finding your room?" The figure didn't respond. I took a few steps forward, gripping the trash cart handle. The wheels squeaked against the carpet, breaking the hallway's unnatural stillness. When I got within 20 feet, the silhouette shifted and turned the corner without a single footstep. I paused. Something about the silence raised the hair on my arms. Human movement always makes sound, fabric brushing, shoes scuffing. But he disappeared like smoke. "Sir?" I tried again, a little quieter this time. That's when I heard it. Soft whispers, coming from the dark corridor around the corner. Not frantic or loud, just low enough that I couldn't tell what was being said, or if it was even directed at me. A chill crept up my spine. I should have walked away. I should have gone straight to the lobby. But curiosity is a powerful kind of foolishness, and I followed the sound. I wish I hadn't. As I pushed the trash cart toward the corner, the whispers stopped abruptly, like someone had pressed mute on the world. The hallway ahead was darker than the others. The motion sensor lights weren't kicking on, which usually meant no one had walked through recently. I turned left slowly, scanning the corridor. Empty. No tall figure, no guest, just the hum of the ice machine at the far end. Then I noticed it. The service door to the maintenance hallway was propped open with a yellow caution sign, a sign I knew I had folded and stored earlier. We never left that hallway open. It led to boiler rooms, storage, the old service elevator that barely worked anymore. My stomach tightened. "Hello?" I called, my voice small in the narrow space. No answer. My first instinct was to close the door and get back to work, but a quieter, more logical voice in me said I needed to make sure no guest had wandered back there. Liability, safety, protocol. The usual things drilled into us during training. I leaned in, pushing the door open with my elbow so I didn't leave fingerprints on the metal. The hallway smelled like dust and machine oil. My footsteps echoed as I leaned in a little further. "Anyone back there?" Silence. I turned to step away, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the frame. A loud metallic echo rang in my ears. My heart launched into my throat. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Rapid, heavy footsteps pounding down the main hallway outside the door. Not walking. Running. Someone had slammed the door. And now someone else was running. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open, stumbling back into the main corridor just in time to hear the footsteps disappear around the far corner toward the stairwell. I didn't wait to find out if they were coming back. I abandoned the trash cart right where it stood and ran, full speed, down the third-floor hallway, my shoes slapping against the carpet. Every instinct screamed that someone was behind me. I didn't look. I didn't want to see if the silhouette was rounding the corner again. The elevator felt too slow, too exposed, so I bolted for the stairs instead. My breath came out in sharp, ragged bursts as I flew down the steps, gripping the railing so hard my fingers ached. When I burst into the lobby, the night security guard, Paul, jumped up from his desk. "Whoa, Claire, what happened?" I struggled to speak, my voice tangled between fear and adrenaline. There's someone on the third floor. A man. Tall. He slammed the maintenance door and ran. "Slow down," Paul said, holding up his hands. "Did you see if he was a guest?" "I told you, I don't recognize him." Paul grabbed his walkie-talkie. "Go to the staff room and lock the door. I'll check the floor." I didn't argue. I hurried into the staff room, locked it, and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold tile. My hands shook. My uniform shirt stuck to my back with sweat. Time stretched, slow and cruel, until the radio crackled faintly through the thin door. 20 minutes later, Paul returned and knocked. "It's me," he said. I opened the door just enough to see his face, pale and tense. "We need to check the cameras," he muttered. "Now." In the small security room, he replayed footage from the lobby cameras. At 11:52 p.m., a tall man in a dark coat slipped in through the side staff door, the one near the dumpsters. He moved quickly, hugging the walls, heading straight for the stairwell. But when Paul scanned through the rest of the footage, his expression changed. Confusion. Unease. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't see him leaving. At all." We checked every angle, every hallway, every exit, the loading dock, even the back parking lot where the cameras weren't great. Nothing. The man entered the hotel. He never came out. He never walked past a camera again. "Maybe he's still inside," I whispered. Paul rubbed the back of his neck, eyes glued to the screen. I did a sweep of all 3 floors. Nobody there. No guests reported anything either. "He was real," I insisted. The tremor in my voice surprised me. I spoke out loud when I saw him. "He ran down the hall. I heard him." "I don't doubt you," Paul said, "but he's not on camera except that one clip." My skin crawled. The hotel felt suddenly smaller, like the shadows had closed in and were listening. "I want to go home," I said. "Yeah, I'll walk you to your car." The parking lot air felt cold on my overheated skin. I didn't relax until I was inside my car with the doors locked, headlights pointed at the exit. Paul gave me a stiff nod and headed back inside, checking over his shoulder twice. Driving home, my mind replayed everything. The silhouette, the whispers, the slamming door, the running footsteps, the missing footage. Someone had been in that hotel. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who knew exactly when to move so the cameras missed him. For weeks after, I triple-checked every hallway before stepping inside. The hotel didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watched. Eventually, I switched to day shifts. I couldn't handle the quiet darkness of the third floor again. But some nights, when the building settles and creaks, I remember the tall figure standing perfectly still at the end of the hall. And I wonder where he went after the cameras stopped seeing him. Because people don't just disappear, not without help from shadows. I've spent most of my adult life behind a steering wheel. Some people work in offices, some in classrooms. I work in motion. I'm a long-distance courier, hauling packages and specialty items across the Southwest where the roads stretch straighter and longer than most folks' patience. I like the solitude. I like the sunrises that creep up slow behind the mountains. I like the feeling that I'm part of some endless American spine connecting towns that wouldn't otherwise see each other. But nights on the road, those are different. They have their own language, one of distant engines, empty lots, and the eerie calm of places meant for crowds but occupied by only you. If you've ever driven through the desert past midnight, you know what I mean. There's a weight to the darkness, a silence that sits too close. That night, I'd been driving for almost 12 hours straight. The heat had been brutal all day, and even after sunset, it felt like the air still held the memory of it. My eyes were burning, and my legs felt like stone. I needed sleep. Just a couple hours, before pushing through the last 100 miles. I pulled off at a lonely rest stop I'd been to once before. Middle of nowhere, 2 cracked picnic tables, some vending machines that barely worked, and a row of parking spaces lined by a chain-link fence. At that hour, it was empty except for a dusty minivan parked under a flickering lamp, far off to the right. No movement around it, no lights inside. I parked away from the building, locked the van, and climbed into the back to sleep. Just a quick nap, I told myself. I'd be gone before anyone even realized another vehicle had been there. I didn't know the desert wasn't done with me yet, not by a long shot. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when it happened. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been 2 hours. What woke me was subtle, a delicate jiggling at the door handle. Not aggressive, not loud, just testing. At first, I wasn't sure if it was part of a dream. My mind was foggy, thick with exhaustion. But when I held my breath, the sound came again, metal rattling gently, like someone using only their fingertips. Every hair on my arms rose. I stayed still, afraid even my breathing might give me away. My van has blackout curtains, cheap ones I'd installed myself, and I moved just enough to peek through the edge. Someone was standing right outside. A tall man, lean, shoulders stiff, wearing a dark jacket despite the desert heat. His face was turned slightly away, but I could see him running his palm along the side of my van. Then, tap, tap, tap. His knuckles rapped against the window like he was listening for a response. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might shake the whole vehicle. "Hey," he whispered softly. Not to me, just to the air, like checking if anything stirred. He circled around toward the back doors. I shifted silently to the opposite side, careful not to disturb the mattress. I watched him tap each window again, slower this time. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't confused. He was assessing. That realization hit cold and heavy. He paused, glanced back toward the dusty minivan under the lamp, and walked toward it. I felt relief for half a second, until the side door slid open, and voici. 3 more people stepped out. 2 men, 1 woman. None of them spoke. They just scanned the parking lot like they were choosing something. That's when I knew I couldn't stay there 1 minute longer. My first instinct was to start the engine and peel out of there, but that would have been suicide. The sound alone would have lit me up like a flare in the desert. Instead, I slid silently into the driver's seat, careful not to bump the horn, and kept all lights off. The tall man was leaning against the minivan now, arms crossed, staring in my general direction as if waiting for a reason to walk back over. The others spread out, checking the bathrooms, peering into empty cars, even looking under the vending machine awning. People don't do that unless they're hunting. My palms were damp as I released the parking brake. My van was old enough to roll in neutral, and the rest stop sloped slightly downhill toward the exit. This was my only chance. I eased the gear shift into neutral and let gravity take over. Every quiet inch felt like an eternity. The van crept forward, wheels whispering against the asphalt. I kept one hand on the wheel, one on the brake, ready, but terrified to use it. The minivan group didn't notice me yet. They were facing the building, distracted. Then I rolled past the first lamppost. The slope steepened, giving me more speed. I kept the headlights off, praying no reflector caught the moonlight wrong. When I reached the bottom of the hill and was far enough from the rest stop to blend into the darkness, I turned the key. The engine coughed, too loud, but the desert swallowed the sound. I flicked on the headlights only when I hit the open road, flooring the gas pedal with shaking legs. No one followed, at least not right away. For the first few miles, I kept checking the side and rear view mirrors every few seconds. My nerves were raw, my pulse refusing to settle. The road stretched ahead of me like a tunnel of blackness broken only by my headlights. Nothing behind me, nothing ahead. Just the hum of my engine and the memory of that door handle shifting under someone else's fingers. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe they were stranded. Maybe they were confused or lost. But nothing about them, nothing fit that. I'd seen too many things on the road to pretend otherwise. About 15 miles out, just as I began convincing myself I'd imagined the danger, my mirror caught a pair of headlights cresting the distant hill. I stiffened. "Don't be them," I muttered. "Please don't be them." But as the vehicle closed the distance, I recognized the shape. A minivan, same outline, same flickering right headlight. My grip tightened on the wheel. I kept my speed steady, not wanting to provoke anything. The van stayed far back, matching my pace. Not passing, not falling behind, just following. I considered calling the police, but cell service in that stretch was spotty on the best of days. My phone showed one bar. I didn't dare risk a dropped call while describing the situation, so I kept driving. Another 10 miles, then 15. The minivan's headlights wavered as it rounded a bend, and suddenly vanished. I slowed slightly, scanning the dark. It hadn't turned onto any visible road. It hadn't pulled off. It had simply disappeared back into the night, as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble anymore. But I didn't relax. Not until I saw the faint glow of a small-town police station rise over the next hill. I pulled in fast, nearly skidding gravel, and parked right under the floodlight. That's when I finally saw my own face in the reflection of the station's glass door, pale, sweat-soaked, and shaken to the bone. Inside, the night officer, a tired-looking man with a salt and pepper mustache, listened patiently as I explained what had happened. I expected skepticism, maybe even a suggestion that exhaustion had gotten the better of me, but instead he sighed deeply and nodded. "Son," he said, "you're not the first one to come in here with a story from that rest stop." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "There have been reports, vehicles being scoped out, folks hearing footsteps outside their windows, groups wandering around after dark. We've sent patrols, but by the time they get there, whoever's doing it is gone." "So what do you think they want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "People who are alone," he said simply. "People who won't be missed right away." The words hit harder than I expected. A shiver went through me despite the warm air inside the building. He offered me coffee and suggested I rest a bit before driving on, but there was no chance of me sleeping again that night. I waited until another officer arrived from morning shift before heading out. The sun was rising by then, painting the desert gold and softening the edges of the world. Daylight makes everything feel safer. Even lies can feel comforting in that early glow. But as I drove past the long, empty roads and wide stretches of sand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the desert held on to things. Footsteps, intentions, unfinished hunts. Before I merged onto the highway, I glanced in my mirrors one more time. Nothing followed me. But that didn't erase what happened. Somewhere out there, a dusty minivan was still roaming, still stopping at lonely places, still waiting for someone who didn't lock their doors or pay attention to the quiet. It reminded me that fear isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's a warning we're lucky to survive. Trust your instincts, stay aware of your surroundings, and never underestimate the danger in quiet places. Safety often depends on the choices you make when no one else is around to protect you. I've lived alone most of my adult life, and for the most part I've always liked it. I like the quiet, the independence, the small rituals that belong to no one but me. Late night reading, mismatched mugs of tea, soft music playing while I fold laundry. After college, while everyone else moved in with partners or crowded into houses with too many roommates, I chose a modest third-floor apartment on the east side of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like mine. That night had started like any other. The rain had begun in the late afternoon, heavy enough to blur the skyline outside my window. By the time midnight rolled around, the downpour had become a steady roar, like someone shaking a giant bag of pebbles above the roof. I was curled up in bed with a thriller novel and a dim lamp, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The storm made everything feel sealed off, like the whole world had shrunk to the size of my small apartment. I liked storms, usually. They made me feel tucked away and safe, as if nothing outside could touch me. Around 1 a.m, I closed my book and set it on the nightstand, letting my eyes drift to the sliding balcony door. Rain hammered against the glass, creating little rivers that streaked downward. I watched them absently, half asleep. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, almost polite, but too distinct to be the rain. I sat up a little straighter. Maybe it was just water hitting the metal railing. The wind gusted hard, and I convinced myself that the noise had been nature's doing. But then it came again. Slower, more deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. My stomach tightened, and I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Rain has rhythm. Storms have chaos. But this was intentional. Someone knocking, someone asking to be acknowledged. I told myself not to look. But curiosity and fear make strangers of us, pushing us to do things we know we shouldn't. I walked toward the curtains and pulled them back. The balcony was a dark blur of moving water, but the moment my eyes adjusted, my breath hitched. Someone was standing there, a tall figure in a long raincoat, hood pulled low, droplets cascading off the edges like tiny beads of silver. They were turned toward the glass, face hidden in shadow, body still as stone. For a second, I couldn't move. My body went rigid, my mind unable to make sense of the sight. It wasn't possible. The balcony was on the 3rd floor. There was no ladder, no stairs leading up to it, just a narrow fire escape at the far end of the building. No one could have reached my balcony without climbing. The figure leaned forward slowly, head tilting like they were trying to see inside despite the darkness. My lamp was off, so they shouldn't have been able to tell I was there. But something about the way they pressed closer to the glass made me feel exposed, as though they knew exactly where I was standing. I stumbled backward and let the curtain fall shut. The room felt instantly smaller. The air tightened. My heart drummed so loudly I could barely hear the storm. I crouched and backed away, using my hands to feel my way toward the bedroom door. My voice got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat, refusing to make sound. By the time I reached the hallway, I was shaking. In the kitchen, I grabbed my phone off the counter. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers clumsy. I started to dial. Then came the unmistakable sound of the balcony door sliding a few inches. Not a gust of wind, not the building settling. Someone was testing it. I froze with my thumb over the call button. I could hear the faint scrape of metal against metal, as if fingers were trying to coax the lock loose. Then, silence, followed by slow footsteps moving toward the living room window. The storm wasn't the thing I needed protection from anymore. I pressed myself against the kitchen counter, forcing myself to breathe quietly. Even through the thick glass of the living room window, I could hear the shift of footsteps, careful, deliberate. like the intruder was searching for another way in. Rain hammered everything in sight, but somehow their movements cut through the noise, clearer than they should have been. I slid to the floor, crawled behind the island counter, and finally forced my shaking hands to dial 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, barely daring to exhale. "There's someone on my balcony," I said. "I'm on the 3rd floor. They climbed up. They're checking the windows." "Stay on the line," she replied. Her voice was steady, practiced, grounding. "Officers are already in your area because of storm calls. They'll be there soon. Stay low. Do not approach the windows." A soft thud sounded from the far wall. I flinched. The footsteps had moved again, this time toward the fire escape. There was another window near it, narrow and old, one I always meant to get repaired but kept putting off. The thought that the latch might not hold made nausea rise in my throat. I crawled down the hallway to the coat closet and slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking questions, reassuring me that help was minutes away. Then I heard scraping, metal against metal. Someone was climbing the ladder just outside the fire escape window, boots slipping slightly against the rain-soaked rungs. I held the phone tight against my cheek, afraid the shaking of my body might make noise. "Please hurry," I whispered. I listened to each footstep as if it belonged to a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The rain pounded. The scraping grew louder. Then, nothing. No more footsteps, no more taps, no more scraping, just silence. A silence worse than any sound. I didn't move again until I heard the wail of sirens cutting through the storm. The officers had to buzz up through the main entrance, and I practically ran to let them in. There were 2 of them, a tall man with rain dripping off his jacket and a younger woman who kept her hand near her radio as she scanned the hallway. I was trembling so badly that one of them steadied me by the shoulder. "Where was the intruder last seen?" the woman asked. "The balcony, and then the fire escape." They moved quickly, checking my windows first. When they reached the balcony door, the man crouched down and pointed. "Fresh mud," he said. "You don't usually get this much splatter unless someone's been climbing." I swallowed hard, feeling bile rise. They slid the door open, carefully, guns holstered but hands ready. The wind blew rain inside, cold and sharp. The balcony floor was a mess of puddles, but on the railing were 2 muddy footprints, clear, distinct, too big to be mine. "He came up from the alley," the woman officer murmured. "That's a long climb, even with the drainage pipes." Another officer arrived to search the alley below. Meanwhile, the first 2 checked the fire escape. The window near it was damp along the edges, as though someone had run their fingers along the frame. "Looks like he tried this one too," the man said. "Didn't get the latch open." My breath caught. "What do you think he wanted?" The woman hesitated before answering. "We can't know, but he wasn't sheltering from the storm, I can tell you that." She closed the balcony door firmly and double-checked the lock. "Pack a bag for the night. We're going to recommend you stay somewhere else until we finish the report and notify your building manager." I didn't argue. I didn't even think to. All I knew was that I no longer felt safe in the 4 walls that used to feel like home. I stayed with a friend that night, jumping at every noise, replaying the sound of those deliberate knocks on my balcony door. The storm eventually passed, leaving the city washed and quiet, but I felt like something inside me had been permanently rewired. 2 days later, my landlord called. "The police told me about what happened," he said. "We checked the alley cameras. The footage is too blurry from the rain, but we saw someone climbing up the side of the building. He was using the drain pipe and the ledges." My blood ran cold. "Did you see him leave?" A pause. "No, that's the strange part. We didn't catch him going down the same way. He must have dropped to the dumpster and climbed over the fence." I knew then that I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at the balcony door, I saw that hooded figure leaning toward the glass. Every time I heard rain, I remembered the tapping that didn't belong to the storm. I moved out 2 weeks later, packed everything I owned in boxes and hauled them down 3 flights of stairs, refusing to ever step onto that balcony again. My new apartment is smaller, but it feels safer. Higher up, with better locks, surrounded by people I can hear through the walls. Some might call that noisy. I call it comforting. But even now, whenever thunder rolls or rain streaks across the windows, I find myself checking the glass twice, sometimes 3 times. Because storms used to make me feel protected, now they remind me how silence can be broken by the wrong kind of knock, and how home can change in a single night. Some people grow up afraid of the dark. I grew up afraid of the woods. My childhood home sat at the edge of a Tennessee cul-de-sac, a safe enough place with trimmed lawns and chain-link fences. But the woods behind our neighborhood were different. Thick, dense, quiet in a way that made your ears ring. Adults called them just trees, but every kid in our school knew there were things in there we couldn't explain. Sounds that didn't match animals we'd learned in science class. Shapes that moved where no wind blew. And worst of all, stories that older kids whispered, claiming they came from friends of friends who'd seen someone watching from the tree line. Not something. Someone. I wasn't supposed to be scared. I was 11 and trying hard to seem brave because that was the age when kids decided who was cool and who was basically doomed. So I pretended the woods didn't bother me, even though every time the sun dipped behind them, my stomach tightened. Around that time, my best friend was Lila Watkins, who lived further out in the county, farther than any streetlights reached. Her house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway beside an overgrown stretch of forest that made mine look like a decorative shrub. You couldn't see the next house from her porch, or the road, or anything past the shadowy slope where the trees thickened into a wall. Her mom, Gretchen, was a nurse who worked night shifts often, which meant the house felt even emptier than the land around it. Lila made up for it by being loud, funny, and obsessed with makeup magazines she bought with babysitting money. We'd been close since 3rd grade, when she traded me half her peanut butter sandwich after mine fell in the dirt. By 6th grade, we knew each other's family drama, favorite snacks, and secret fears, but neither of us ever talked about the woods. Maybe because admitting fear made it real. Maybe because neither of us wanted to look childish. That winter, Tennessee had one of its weird warm spells. The air felt like early spring, but the weather forecast warned about heavy winds sweeping across the state school, let out early because the power had already flickered twice that morning. "Sleep over at my place?" Lila begged as we stepped off the bus. "Mom won't be home till tomorrow. We'll do makeovers, eat junk, watch my DVD of Mean Girls, the whole thing." I hesitated. A night at her house meant a night beside those woods. She rolled her eyes. "You're not scared of some trees?" "Of course not," I lied. By the time we packed my backpack, grabbed snacks, and walked down her long driveway, the sky was already peeling open with streaks of fast-moving clouds. The wind howled the way it did in movie scenes right before a monster appears, but neither of us said it aloud. Inside, the Watkins house smelled like cinnamon plug-ins and leftover chili. The lights flickered twice while we were setting up her makeup kits, but we ignored it. The wind rattled the windows hard enough to make the glass vibrate, but we ignored that too. By 9:30, the storm felt like it had settled on top of the roof, pounding and scraping, the way storms do when the wind cuts sideways through the hollows. We were halfway through painting each other's nails when the porch light flickered once and died. Lila froze. "Aw, come on, not now." Then came a knock. 3 measured, deliberate knocks. Slow, even, not rushed, not frantic, not wind blowing debris against the door. Knuckles, human knuckles. We looked at each other. No car headlights, no crunch of tires on gravel, and her nearest neighbors lived a 1/4 mile away, too far to hear a door knock even if they wanted to. "What was that?" I whispered, though I already knew. Another gust of wind slammed against the siding. Then, footsteps. Heavy ones. Back and forth pacing across the porch boards. The kind of footsteps that belong to a grown man, not some kid playing a prank. Lila reached for the curtain over the front window. "Don't!" I hissed, grabbing her wrist. She slipped free, opened the curtain a sliver, and looked. Then her breath caught. "There's nobody there," she whispered, "but something's walking." The footsteps creaked across the porch again, slow and grinding, and even though nothing stood outside, the porch swing was moving as if someone had just stepped off it. My throat dried. Lila's hands shook so hard the curtain swayed. We weren't imagining it. Something was out there, and it wasn't the storm. We backed away from the window, hearts pounding loud enough I wondered if whoever, or whatever, was outside could hear us. "Should we call your mom?" I whispered. Lila shook her head. "She's on a 12-hour night shift. She'd be in the middle of meds or charting. She won't answer." The footsteps on the porch stopped suddenly, followed by a silence thick enough to choke on. We waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no wind, no swing creaking. Just the storm battering the tin roof like fists. Then came a different sound. A low dragging noise from the side yard, like something heavy being pulled across wet ground. Not leaves, not branches. Something weighty. The sound grew louder as it moved closer to the house. "What is that?" I whispered. "I don't want to know," Lila said, voice shaking. The dragging paused. Then came the metallic clank of something snapping. Lila's face drained of color. "Oh God," she breathed. "The garden gate, the one by the mudroom." "That's impossible," I said. "You told me your mom padlocks it at night." "She does. Always. Always." She swallowed. "I checked it myself earlier when we brought the snacks inside." We crept toward the mudroom, the only room in the house with linoleum floors and a thin wooden back door that suddenly felt way too thin. The wind rattled the windows, but underneath that was something else. Breathing. Low. Steady. Patient. Right on the other side of that door. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the hallway. "We have to hide," I whispered. "Now." We darted upstairs. Not running, because running made noise, but moving fast enough to feel like our lungs would burst. The house groaned under the pounding wind, but the smaller noises, the ones we didn't want to hear, still cut through. Footsteps at the back steps. Someone testing the mudroom door handle, the metal rattling in a slow, almost methodical rhythm. We ducked into Gretchen's room, climbed into her walk-in closet, and shut the door gently. The closet smelled like her perfume, vanilla mixed with something musky, and for a moment, I felt safer just breathing it in. "Do you think it's someone from the woods?" Lila whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "What if it's an animal? Animals don't knock." She bit her lip. "What if it's a hunter who got lost? Hunters don't breathe like that." We fell silent. The wind roared. The trees outside whipped and bent. Something thumped against the siding downstairs, a dull, heavy impact like a shoulder hitting the wall. Then, creak. A floorboard. Inside the house. My heartbeat went wild. I felt every pulse in my ears. Lila's hand squeezed mine so tight my fingers tingled. We waited. More creaks. Slow. Approaching the stairs. We both held our breath. The closet air felt stale and hot, and my legs started trembling from crouching too long. "Did you lock the front door?" I whispered. She hesitated. I think so." "Lila." "I don't know. I was getting nail polish. I didn't—" Another footstep closer. I held her hand tighter. We didn't speak after that. We didn't dare. Minutes stretched like hours. Wind slammed against the house again, covering whatever quieter sounds might have followed. At some point, I couldn't tell whether the things I heard were real or the storm playing tricks. Eventually, exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, but fear jolted me awake every time I drifted. By the time morning crawled through the window cracks, pale and watery, neither of us had slept more than 10 minutes straight. When we finally forced ourselves out of the closet, sunlight revealed something worse than the night. The gate stood open. The padlock lay inches away, snapped clean open, and through the muddy yard were two long, deep, parallel grooves, leading straight from the woods to the back steps. You'd think daylight would make everything feel better. It didn't. Daylight just made everything clearer. We stood on the back steps staring at the grooves carved through the yard. The mud was still damp from the night's storm, glistening in lines that didn't match anything normal. They weren't tire tracks, they weren't footprints, they weren't drag marks from equipment. They were too deep, too clean, too straight. Two parallel trenches slicing from the tree line all the way to the house. "This is not normal," Lila whispered. "No," I said. "It's really not." Gretchen's house backed right against the woods. No fence, no barrier, just a strip of meadow that blurred into rough undergrowth. The grooves started at the very edge of the trees, so clean it looked like something had begun in the darkest part of the forest and dragged itself, or something else, directly toward the house. "What do you think made those?" I asked quietly. "I don't know." Her voice wavered. "And I don't want to." We walked slowly around the yard. The storm had knocked over the recycling bin and scattered branches everywhere, but none of that looked unusual. The grooves, though, they didn't stop at the stairs. They ended at the mudroom door, where we'd heard the breathing. I felt a cold twist in my stomach. Something was right here. "Stop," Lila whispered. "Please stop." We moved into the mudroom next. The door frame showed splintering around the lock. Not enough to break through, but enough to look deliberate, intentional, like someone had tested it. The kitchen smelled stale, metallic, as if leftover fear had seeped into the air. The wind chimes outside the window tinkled faintly. I almost jumped. We checked the front door next. Locked, but the porch swing hung crooked, twisted so far to the right that it couldn't have moved that way naturally from the wind. "Do we tell your mom?" I asked. "No," she said instantly. "She'll think we made it up." "But something happened." "I know that," she snapped, then softened. I know her. She works late. She's tired. She'll say it was animals, or wind, or maybe that we scared ourselves." "What about the cops? What would we tell them? We heard breathing and saw some lines in the yard? They'd laugh." She wasn't wrong. Adults never believed kids when it came to things like this. They'd rather pretend the world was rational than accept something strange on the edge of their control. So we spent the morning in tense silence, cleaning up the nail polish disaster from the night before and avoiding the windows. Every sound made us jump. The refrigerator hum, the furnace clicking, the ice maker shifting. Around noon, we walked the wood's edge again, squinting into the shadows between the pines. A sheet of cold air drifted out from the trees, prickling my skin. Something had come out of those woods last night. Something heavy enough to carve the ground. Something tall enough to knock on the door. Something patient enough to breathe through the mudroom frame while two sixth-grade girls hid upstairs. "Let's go back inside," Lila whispered. We didn't go near the back door for the rest of the day. We didn't speak of the sleepover at school, not to classmates, not to teachers, definitely not to our parents, but we carried the fear with us. At recess, every snap of a branch made me jump. Lila, normally bold and unflappable, started avoiding windows after sunset. She insisted we study at my house instead of hers. Her driveway, once a normal country driveway, now looked like a tunnel leading into darkness. A week passed. The grooves in the yard faded under new rain, but the unease didn't fade with them. 2 weeks later, Lila mentioned something new. "My mom said she heard something last night," she whispered as we walked to the bus. "What do you mean?" "She said she thought she heard knocking on the side of the house, not the front door, like someone tapped the siding." My stomach flipped. "Did she check?" She opened the door and saw nothing. Wind rattled the bus sign above us. I flinched. "Has she ever locked the garden gate during the week?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Lila nodded. "Every night, since forever. But 2 nights ago she found it unlatched again." She swallowed, padlock hanging open. My throat tightened. "We should tell someone," I whispered. "Like a teacher, or your mom, or somebody." "And say what?" she snapped. "We don't even know what we saw." Her anger wasn't real anger. It was fear wearing a louder mask. We stopped arguing after that. But I started noticing new things. The woods behind our neighborhood seemed louder at night. Sometimes I thought I heard dragging. Faint, distant, but familiar. Sometimes when I walked home alone, I felt watched from the tree line. I knew it was probably my imagination. But some nights, I wasn't so sure. It took 3 months before I slept at Lila's house again. Her birthday came in early spring, and she begged me to come over. Her mom was off. The weather was calm. The woods looked peaceful under new green leaves. "Just one night," she said. "Please. I miss having my best friend over." I didn't want to admit I was still scared, so I agreed. We spent the afternoon eating sheet cake and watching Disney movies like little kids again. The sun went down slowly, stretching long red stripes across the horizon. By 9, the house felt normal. By 10, the woods didn't. I kept glancing at the mudroom door. The lock gleamed under the porch light like a tiny metal warning. Lila noticed. "You're thinking about that night," she said quietly. "A little." "Me too." We went upstairs early, brushing our teeth and settling into a room with flashlights and gossip magazines. At midnight, the house was still quiet. At 12:30, something changed. A thud sounded on the far side of the porch. We both froze. Another thud. Not footsteps, not knocking. A single, heavy impact. "Maybe it's a branch," Lila whispered. "Maybe," I whispered back. We didn't go to the window. We didn't even breathe loudly. The house stayed still after that, unnervingly still. No wind, no branches scraping, just silence so thick it felt wrong. We stayed awake until dawn, listening, waiting, terrified to move. When morning finally came, we crept downstairs. The porch was clear. The yard was untouched. But the gate? Unlatched. Again. 2 fresh grooves cut through the dew leading from the trees to the steps. That was the moment we finally told her mom everything. I don't know if she believed us, but she installed motion lights and cameras the next week, and I never slept at Lila's house again. Some fears change you permanently. Some fears follow you. And some fears wait quietly in the woods, leaving marks you can't explain. Just because adults don't see danger doesn't mean it isn't real. Trust your instincts. Fear isn't weakness, it's awareness. And sometimes the things we can't explain deserve more caution than the things we can. I used to brag about how peaceful my neighborhood was. A sleepy suburban street, maple trees everywhere, dogs barking at perfectly normal hours, the occasional teenage skateboarder who thought he was invincible. For someone like me, someone who worked nights as a remote transcription editor, it was perfect. My home office sat at the front of the house, overlooking the street. I'd crack the window on crisp evenings, let the breeze drift in, and type away while the world outside grew quiet. But the year everything happened, autumn came earlier than usual. The nights felt colder, the wind heavier, and the quiet stretched a little too long. I didn't notice the shift until that particular Tuesday evening. Around 10:30 p.m., I stepped away from my desk to stretch and rolled my chair toward the window. That's when I saw him. A man, tall, thin, wearing a long coat, stood beneath the single street lamp across from my house. He wasn't walking a dog. He wasn't fiddling with a phone. He wasn't moving at all. He was just standing there, facing my window. At first, I thought maybe he was waiting for a ride, or maybe someone nearby had gotten locked out. But after a few minutes of watching him stand in that exact same spot, the hairs on my arms lifted. Something about the stillness wasn't right. I closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but I kept glancing at the window, picturing him still there, staring. By midnight, when I finally checked again, the street lamp was empty. No footsteps, no car, nothing. Just the faint circle of yellow light on the pavement. I told myself it was nothing. A weird moment. A stranger passing through. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't the last time I'd see him. 2 nights later, the air felt even colder. I wrapped myself in a hoodie and settled into my chair for another long shift. I don't know what made me look outside, instinct maybe, or the lingering unease from the other night. But when I pulled the curtain back, my breath caught. He was there again. Same street lamp, same stillness, same direction of his gaze, straight at my window. This time he lifted a hand, not a wave, not a gesture for help, just a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. Yes, I see you seeing me, kind of motion. I dropped the curtain so fast it snapped against the window frame. My pulse hammered. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he had some reason to be there. But who stands under a street lamp, motionless, staring at a stranger's house? I forced myself to wait a full 5 minutes before checking again. When I peeked, he was still there, unmoving, like he had all the time in the world. That night, I didn't work. I didn't sleep either. I kept pacing between my living room and my bedroom, listening for footsteps that never came. Around 2 a.m, I gathered the courage to step outside onto the porch and look across the street. Empty. He had disappeared again without a trace. The next evening, nothing happened. And the night after, nothing again. I started to think maybe it had been a fluke. Maybe he'd moved on. But fear leaves footprints inside you, and mine were already set deep. I slept with the curtains closed and the lights dim. Every time a car passed, every time a branch tapped the siding, my shoulders tensed. I didn't know that the worst part hadn't even begun yet. It was a Thursday night, creeping close to midnight, when I heard the sound that still makes my skin crawl. Slow footsteps on my porch steps, not the rushed thud of a delivery driver, not the bold stomp of a neighbor. Slow, deliberate, testing each wooden step like they were savoring the sound. I froze behind my office door, listening. The steps reached the top of the porch, and then stopped. I held my breath and tiptoed to the door, pressing my eye to the peephole. No one was there. No movement. No sound. Just the porch light flickering in the wind. But taped to the door, angled just so I couldn't miss it, was a Polaroid photograph. My stomach dropped. The picture showed my silhouette, sitting at my desk, working at my computer. The image was taken from outside, from the angle of the street lamp. My hands shook so badly the photo almost slipped. He had been watching me long before I ever noticed him. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, their cruisers lighting up the entire street. They took the photo, walked around the property, shined flashlights into bushes and down the street. Probably a prank, one of them said, though his tone was far from confident. We'll put extra patrols near your house for the next few nights, the other added. They left after half an hour. I didn't go back to work. I locked my office door, crawled under a blanket in the living room, and kept the TV on until sunrise. Every creak in the house felt like a message. Every shadow felt like a figure. The man hadn't needed to break in to get inside my head. For a few days, the police patrols helped. I saw cruisers pass by every few hours, their slow crawl reassuring. I worked with the curtains fully shut and the porch lights blazing so bright it felt like I was living in a dentist's office. No sign of him. No photo. No footsteps. By the 4th night, patrol cars stopped passing as often. They had other calls, other priorities. And that was the night, of course, that everything escalated. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft humming sound, a strange, rhythmic pressure on my front door. Not knocking, not pounding, but the doorbell being pressed over and over again, lightly, patiently, almost experimentally. Ding. Pause, ding. Pause, ding. My whole chest seized. I slid off the couch and crawled behind it, clutching my phone. I didn't go near the door, didn't check the peephole, didn't breathe louder than a whisper. I called 911, whispering, "He's back. He's ringing the doorbell. Please hurry." The operator stayed with me until I heard sirens approaching. The doorbell stopped instantly, as if he knew exactly when they were coming. When the officers searched the yard, he was gone. Vanished again, leaving behind nothing but a faint trail of cigarette smoke drifting through the cold air near my window. One officer knelt and examined the welcome mat. "He stood right here," he said, "long enough to soak the mat through." I didn't even realize I was crying until one of them handed me a bottle of water and told me to sit down. They looked around for nearly an hour, but didn't find a single footprint on the sidewalk. "He's watching from farther away now," one officer said. "He's smart, patient." And I knew he wasn't finished. After that night, I never saw him again. There were no more Polaroids, no more footsteps. The street lamp stayed empty, just a lonely circle of yellow light on cracked pavement. But fear has a way of sticking to your ribs, settling into your routines, shaping the way you breathe. I changed everything. I installed floodlights, cameras, new locks. I moved my office to the back bedroom. I stopped working with the window open. I kept the curtains closed even during the day. My friends tried to comfort me. "Maybe he left town," they'd say. "Maybe it was just a creep playing games." But creeps don't stand under the same lamp for days without moving. Creeps don't take Polaroids like trophies. Creeps don't ring doorbells as if they have all the time in the world. Obsessive people do. Patient people do. People who don't rush because they know exactly what they want. The police filed the report as harassment by unknown individual. No leads, no matches, no follow-ups. Weeks passed, then months. The cold dissolved into winter, then melted into spring. But even now, a year later, I still close my curtains tightly every night. I still avoid looking at the street lamp. And some nights, when I'm working late and the house is too quiet, I catch myself expecting to see him step back into the light, tall, still, watching. Because the truth is, he didn't need to break in to take something from me. He took the part of my life where I felt safe being alone, and I've never gotten it back.